And for today's session, which is on feedback, I want to really encourage you all, if you have questions or if you have comments about things that have worked for you with trying to, in online environment, to try to stay in touch with what's happening with your students, feel free to unmute yourself and to go ahead and talk. I'll be manning the chat, and others will be too. So if you have questions you want to put in there. But I'm really hoping that today's session might be an opportunity for you to ask questions. It's going to be about some of the features of Moodle that you might be really familiar with, or features that you've used a lot but you've always had questions about. Eric is going to be taking the lead on a lot of this because I call him our gradebook guru. He has explained the mysteries of math to me many times, sometimes over and over again, and is really good at that. So, he's here to answer a lot of those questions, and I hope that you'll take advantage of that. So with no further ado, I'll turn things over to Eric and let him take over.
Great, thanks, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Eric. I have a very simple question. So I had a class and a student was the first to join the meeting. And then when I tried to record, I couldn't, because it seems that the first person to start Zoom is the person that has control of everything. Is that right? Or?
So I believe if the Zoom meeting is set to have people can join before the host does, the first person that does connect to that meeting, or if it's empty prior, they'll assume that host role, and they can pass that off to anyone else once they've joined. So if you're running into that situation, you could ask them to go to the participants window and say make host for you once you've come in.
Yeah, because I could never start the recording. I had a speaker, and then it got all very, very complicated. So I learned the bad way that, yeah, I have to start first so that I can be in control.
Mine is set up so that when I come in, it automatically makes me the host. And then when I leave, I can assign a host. And I don't know what I clicked on to make it do that, but there is a setting for that.
Antonio, there could be another setting, like if you are following the link Moodle course, it doesn't necessarily realize that you are the original host to that meeting. So I recommend opening up your Zoom client or going to the Zoom website to launch your meeting. Even though the Moodle course would be very convenient, that is one of the ramifications of that approach for the host. We certainly want students to go that way, but for you to start from Zoom versus Moodle would alleviate that problem. Or just show up 15 minutes early all the time.
That's what I think I'm going to do, is get it all set, and then I'm in control. I mean, not that I tape all the sessions, but with speakers, I'm taping them so that I could use them for further courses.
Right, of course.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So Bonnie, I think I'm going to go ahead and start with the activity completion as our starting point, and then we'll cover some other topics as we move along. Everyone, of course, please feel free to ask any questions. I'll rely on Bonnie to kind of monitor our chat as people might have questions going forward. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And so what I'd like to start with today is something called activity completion. And this is a setting that is available kind of just under the undercurrent of your course. But unless you actually are actively using it, you may not even notice it as something that is available. And the one important piece I want to talk about with activity completion is, if you are looking to use this in your course for the fall, it's pretty important that you work through the nuances of that setup for your course content before the course begins, before the term begins. because what Moodle can do, as I'll illustrate, is it can track the activity of your students' clicks within that content and automatically mark those items as complete for you. But if you were to not have that set up and students have already engaged in that content and you set up that activity completion after that activity has happened, it won't always catch that retroactively. So make sure that you're using this and having it planned ahead a little bit in order to make full use of that feature. So I'll go into, I'm in my sample course that we have with many students here. And let me just jump back to the main page. And I'm going to just start with actually a very simple report that you can look at that is just to get a sense, are my students in this course? And some of you might have found this already, and that's the roster report, or roster block, excuse me. And if you look at participants, you can see who's been active recently in that last access to course. This page can be filtered or sorted. So if you wanted to click this column here, you can see who's been there recently or who's never been there. We have a lot of sample students that don't actually do a lot in this course, but I can sort it the other way and you can see who's been in here recently. So that's just a quick heads up. Sorry, backtracking a little bit back to activity completion, which is a separate thing, but I like to just show that as a quick report to see who's in my course currently. All right, so activity completion is enabled for all of our courses at Augsburg, but they don't necessarily have to be enabled for each item in your course until you want to use it. So for example, this sample course has a couple of checkboxes here on the far right. And as you can see, not everything does, which means that some of these items are marked for activity completion. This dotted box here for this H5P test is one. Here's another one, that's our syllabus file, and a few other checkboxes. This is really helpful for not only for you as an instructor to kind of track how students are proceeding through the course, but it's a good item, it's a good checkbox visual for the students to kind of verify, okay, I have gone and done that required work, and they can move on to the other content in your course. So it's helpful for everyone involved. I'm going to show an example of the results of what you can get from this once a student is actively doing those assignments. There is a report for faculty under the reports administration block. And you'll see activity completion. And activity completion will give you a checkbox list for all the items that are using that feature. This isn't everything in the course, mind you, because not everything is using that activity completion, but it is everything that is leveraging that system. And you can kind of track your students' progress here.
Eric, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Yeah, so, you know, there might be some redundancy here if you have an assignment that you can tell has been completed when the student has submitted it. So would that be marked as activity completion as well? If it's just the homework that they have to fill out and submit, obviously they've completed it. Yes.
Yes, there would be some redundancy here because this is not necessarily tied into the gradebook. Right, so there would be, you know, for modules that you're familiar with, and it's very obvious that students have submitted some work to you, this wouldn't necessarily be illuminating anything new for you, but it does give a nice broad overarching view of the overall course in a more compact package.
Sure, and if it's just, say, a link that you've provided and you have activity completion checked for that, basically all they have to do is click on the link. They don't even really have to engage with it or read it or anything.
Yeah, that's right. So as you pointed out, you've got assignment modules can use this, a URL link can use this, a Moodle quiz, a Moodle forum can use this. And because of those different types of activities, the criteria for marking this complete will be different. And you'll have some options on how that's defined on the back end.
Got it, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm gonna show you a couple of examples of
can I just interject at this point? Just one thing. As someone who uses this kind of a report, it is very quantifying rather than quality, quality check. But what I loved about it was, let's say we're in the third week of the course and I get an email from a student saying, you know, I'm so confused. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand anything. And I could go in and look at this and I can see, you know, do they have checks? You know, have they been kind of doing things? And if they haven't, you know, even though I can't be sure that they've read something, if there is a check, they've at least opened it. Then my response to that student will be very different from the student, you know, who's got all the boxes checked. So I always liked it as just a way to know a starting point. What is the student actually doing in the class so far? And then I can modulate my response to that. I just found it very helpful.
Thanks, Bonnie. That's great. So I'm going to show how this can be, how you can create this. And I'm going to start with a one that hasn't been done yet. I'm going to go to my review of literature assignment, which is a little farther down. Review of literature. So looks like it maybe has been set already. So I'll go, so I'm going to go to edit settings for my assignment. And if you scroll down to underneath the grade area, you'll see activity completion listed here. And so when you start out with a course module, chances are it's going to be something like this. It's going to say, do not indicate activity completion. That is our default setting for any module that you create new, just so that that factor doesn't come into play until you're actually ready to modify this to the way you want. So there'll be no checkbox for you or the student to see. Now, Moodle will have two options. You can actually set this for a manual marking by the student. So if it's something that they would actually have to check that box for themselves to indicate they've done that particular assignment. That can actually be really helpful for students if they want to kind of have some control over what they feel they've done. So it's really a preference on your part, how you're wanting to design this course. But this other content could be, you know, if you're relying on that activity completion for other things, you may want to have a little more control over that. And that's where Moodle can be marking the activity complete when certain conditions are met. In the case of the assignment module, there's a couple of options you can use. You can just have them, if they've clicked on the link to the assignment module and you feel like that's sufficient, you can have Moodle mark it complete there. You can have students actually wait to receive a grade from you until it's considered complete. I think the most commonly used setting is where students must submit something to the assignment. That way that gives them some feedback when they've actually submitted that work, even though it hasn't been graded yet, they know they can move forward in the course content. The expected completed on setting is not enabled by default, but if you wanted to set a certain date of expectation that this is being done, what that will do is it will set a calendar item for the student in their Moodle dashboard so they can see there is something actually due that day or expected to be completed by that date. So we'll give them some additional prompts in the Moodle interface for that. I'm going to go ahead and leave that on. And then I'm going to.
Can I say something? For those of you, you know, in the assignment, there's a due date, which also has a calendar prompt. So it's kind of redundant. But if you're using online forums, there isn't really a due date for forums. I mean, you have to put it in your directions. But if you use activity completion for the forum, and I know he'll show it later, but that would be one that you, sorry, an activity where you might want to use the deadline.
Yeah, thanks.
So if you have a due date on an assignment, will that fill in by default on the activity completion, or do you have to type it in again?
The activity completion report will not provide that, the due date value. It will be a separate item. So I think Bonnie's recommendation is a good one, setting the due date up here. If you want that report to show the due date here, you would need to check it there as well. Feels like a little bit of busy work and maybe not you know, the most important thing to do. I've not necessarily recommending that this is being turned on, but it is something that would kick in for the, you know, if you're not using a due date in your assignment, but you want to have some kind of date marked as an expectation, you could use this as an alternative.
if you have a negotiation with a student where they're supposedly required to input something and some disaster happened in their life, put it that way, where all of a sudden they just cannot, complete it during that time, then you are able to moderate that or modify that or change that somewhat so that that will not denigrate their grade, put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. The activity completion date expectation has no bearing on whether they can submit the work or not, or how it's being graded. It's really just more of a courtesy date during as you're using that report module.
And then as a small aside to that, I'm wondering how Carl Camel actually checks that box.
Yeah, I'll demonstrate how this looks, or maybe not for Carl. We'll see which student we can demo here. So again, these are each module will have activity completion settings that are slightly different based on the activity type that you are working with. So I'm going to flip over to, actually I've got a student now here. This is, I think, Christopher Cow is our student. So this is a student view of Christopher. And looks like Christopher's done a few items already. And if you look down at the review of literature, nothing's checked here. And so in order for that checkbox to kick in, the student will need to submit a file. And Christopher's looking to sell his mower because he's able to graze pretty well. And so that submission's now been entered for that review of literature assignment. If I go back to the course main page, and you'll see now that Moodle has automatically checked that box for that assignment. So now that student can move on to the next item. That box could stay unchecked until it was actually graded by you if you wanted to add additional criteria for that assignment module for the activity completion. But usually this works pretty well for the student's viewpoint. They've done what they need to do.
And another example, again, activity completion works a little bit different for different activities. So if it was a quiz, you might want to set that it is completed when the student receives a grade, because that's going to be the marker if it's an auto-graded quiz that they've completed it.
Right. Yeah, and I'll illustrate that here. So I've got a syllabus quiz in our course, and you'll see the activity completion has been set to require a grade. For the quiz, you can say students must view it or must receive a grade, which again, I would recommend that has more meaning for a quiz in most cases. You can also granularly set if it's actually a passing grade or not. And that's something that you can do in the quiz module at the grading standpoint to say if it meets a certain threshold of points, it's passed and completed. But that is not a requirement. You can say they just need to do it. And because the quiz will auto grade, it will essentially create that completion once they've submitted the attempt. Okay, let me do one more. Let's do.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Michael asked, is there a button to enable activity completion for all assignments?
It is not set for all. No, so this would be individually managed per assignment or per module.
Yeah, I responded. We have asked Moodle for that capability. They have not built it yet. It would be nice if you could update do all of your activity completion on one page, but now you have to go into each item individually and do that.
Mm-hmm. So one additional aspect of the, we could go into some other examples of different types of modules doing that activity completion, but in order to move forward here this morning, one big advantage of once you've got activity completion set for items such as my syllabus quiz, You know, something that might be an important first step before moving into other content for the term. You can not only set you know, activity completion for that, but then if I want my next assignment for the first week, for example, might be this simple direct grading assignment. And what I can do in addition to activity completion is say, I don't want anyone to take action on this activity until they've completed something else. So in this case, I'm going to this assignment module, and just above activity completion is restrict access. And what I'm going to do is add a restriction here where this assignment can't be accessed until they've completed the syllabus quiz. All right. And so this menu is going to give me a couple of ways to restrict this module. I'm going to use activity completion, and it gives me a chance to choose anything in my course that has activity completion enabled for it. And in this case, the syllabus quiz is what I want to say has to be done. This has to be marked complete, and I'll save that change. Okay, and so you'll see this restricted banner underneath this module now saying this can't be available to students until their syllabus quiz has been done. So if you're looking for an example where you need to really guide a chronological process for your curriculum, or you think that's best practice for them to have, you know, the best outcomes for learning, you can use that activity completion as a lockstep process for certain aspects of your course. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that across the board for everything, because that really gets rid of a lot of freedom for the students to navigate and move around. But if there are certain key points where that chronology is important, that's a really nice feature that Moodle can provide. Would anyone see use for that feature of restricting access for certain things?
Yeah, I was just thinking, if you're requiring several drafts of a paper and each one is a different link or a different assignment, would you be able to say, you know, you can't submit the final draft until you've submitted the previous drafts and gotten feedback on them using activity completion?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you would just make that pairing of the previous expected assignment and kind of work through that in sequence. The SOAR course, the online SOAR for this summer's students, was using this feature quite a bit to help guide them through each aspect of the orientation. If you haven't seen that course, it's pretty well done, and that's really helped them, you know, keep really lockstep with the process and have a very consistent experience for every student.
I used it to, the students had to do an honesty sort of pledge. And instead of making it the first item of the quiz, I had them sort of sign this honesty policy before they took the quiz, and then they couldn't get into the quiz until they had signed it. So that way it made it like really clear it was an extra part, an extra step they had to do.
Yeah, you're highlighting the importance of that, right? Putting extra weight on it. It's great. Good. Any questions for activity completion or the restrict access? Maybe what I will just reload our students' view of this course so you can see what they've see which I think this student already did that assignment, so they probably won't need to see that again. But yeah, so they have to complete the syllabus quiz. They see that it's there, but they actually get that wording of, hey, you need to you know, go take care of that syllabus quiz first, which is a great way to kind of add some instructor presence for your course without you doing a lot of that work and reminding. You might say that once, but by having that restrict access built in, Moodle is reminding students, hey, you need to take care of this first before moving on.
So when you check one of those boxes on the main page like that, does it pop up to ask you what the requirements are for completion?
So these students won't be marking these manually. Because there's the dashed boxes here indicates that Moodle is marking them automatically based on their actions. So they don't see, the students won't see what has to be done within that activity.
But you as an instructor, if you're going down there, you can check those boxes manually, correct?
No, you would not be able to. Is that true, Bonnie?
Yes, if you've chosen that a condition has to be met in order for activity completion to be completed, then you'll get that dotted line box, and nobody can check that manually. That's Moodle checking when the condition is met.
I got it. I thought that was a way for you to go through and select what you wanted for activity completion.
Activity completion has to be chosen within the settings of each activity.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, this report is strictly a view-only report. But you can jump to those modules here in the header. So if you need to take a look at something, you can jump to it right from here. And that takes you to that activity.
So it's one reason we wanted to fit this in here. If you're starting to build your course, now is the time as you're building these different items to set activity completion. And I can't stress enough that if you have duplicate sorts of assignments, in other words, if you have, you're going to do online discussion forums and you're going to do them every week or every other week, build one, get all your settings correct, and then duplicate and change your prompt and move it to the right week. It'll save you so much time in building. You know, just keep that in mind as you're doing it. It's a great shortcut. And then, you know, if you have activity completion set conditionally for when they submit it, then it's just going to be there. If you've built, we're going to talk a little bit about the gradebook today. If you have a category and it's going to go in a certain category, all those items will go in that category automatically for you. So I don't know, Eric, can you show them the duplicate on the menu on the main page for the module?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have editing on.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Eric, can you click on course completion on the far left? I think there was a question about bulk editing, right? Second tab, third tab, tab 3, yeah. And then go to bulk edit activity completion at the top. Third tab.
Ooh.
And edit.
Yeah. So this would be everything, not even just assignments.
So there is a way to do activity completion all on one page. Is that what you're saying? Oh.
So I think that's, yeah, so that would turn on everything.
You'd have to pick all the assignments or something. So right now we're trying to edit everything, but.
So how do you get to that? What's the pathway?
Course completion on the left. I'm sorry, it took me a while to find it. I had to go back and look at some documentation.
So you could just check certain items here?
Yeah, like all of your assignments or.
Maybe I'll take these 4 Moodle pages.
Okay.
But then what about the conditions? How do you put the conditions in?
Yeah, it looks like I would need to edit those 3. And then, so it seems like I'd want to do it by like items here, not across the board, because each module has different types of settings for that completion.
But if all of your assignments, everybody needed to turn something in order to finish it, you could at least do all those in one.
Yeah, so, that's a good point.
So if you already have your course built, this is really a huge thing. Maybe we need to make a tip sheet about this, this process, because this would be a time saver for setting it. Yeah, it wouldn't help with the due dates or the expected date.
Yeah, because we'd likely have those be different for everyone.
But just if you wanted it to be activity completion and not worry about the dates, it would be a huge time saver. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, one more thing. Go to the second tab, default activity completion. And then check the box for assignments. And edit. Is this more what you wanted?
So let's see, if all the assignments will get changed now?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Nice. Nice.
so default probably is even better than the bulk.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think this
Sorry
calls
to
for a
interrupt,
video.
just unrelated to what you're talking about.
That's okay. And I will just reiterate, try to do this before the start of the term. The reason is, especially if we get, I'll show you an example of what happens when students start to engage in your course. For example, you can see a number of students have already taken part in one of these activities here, the forms with ratings, for example. If I want to make a change to that activity completion setting, Moodle is going to put up a bit of a roadblock for me. It's going to say, give me this warning, right, how this activity has already been marked for as completed for a number of students. If I need to modify my criteria for my forum, that's going to essentially clear out the completion, and those students would essentially need to, it will interrupt the flow of what's, what's actually considered complete or not. So be thinking about that ahead of time before. Best practice would be to get it before the students start to engage in that.
Eric, while we're here, since we're in the forum, you'll notice that it has this different option than the assignment because it's a different kind of activity. So here you can check and say that they have to post 3 discussions or replies. I often pick that first one rather than saying they have to create a discussion and then post 2 replies, because sometimes students make mistakes. They actually reply to somebody when they want to post their initial. So if you just say, if your expectation is like 3 posts at the end of the day, then I think this is probably the best choice. And then that's what I mean about a quantity count. A lot of times when you're trying to look at or assess students' participation and engagement in forums, what you want, first of all, is to know, are they doing the right number of posts? And then you want to go in and check the quality. So this is just a real quick way to see, I've always said that you got to have a little bit of border collie in you in order to be a good online teacher, because those first couple of weeks you want to be constantly checking, are people are they in the course? Are they doing what they need to be doing? And so this activity completion report can really help you be the best border collie that you can be.
Great. Any other questions related to this?
Just to make sure, for students who tend to kind of jump around a little bit, they might want to actually read the last few chapters of a book first, or take on a subject that is more near and dear to their hearts, or that they understand a little better, and they think, okay, I'll get through this one and get it over with. With that restriction on there that you have to do one and then move on, how flexible is that for, and say, an individual student that comes to you and says, well, okay, there's 10 chapters here and I've done 7 through 9, but how do I get, okay, I can go back and start over at 1, but how do I get to 10?
Yeah, I think that's the thinking of your curriculum, and being selective about this process, because you don't want it to be so restrictive that you've lost motivation as a student to engage in the content if it gets very unwieldy and rigid. So I think you certainly wouldn't recommend using this for every item in your course, but if there are a couple of pairings that really are important to work through on a chronology standpoint, Bridget's example is a good one. Say, make sure you're reading the honesty statement and agreeing to that policy before embarking on the next thing. That highlights the importance of that to the students coming from you as an instructor, because the course is doing that. And so if you do it all the way across the board, it might actually minimize the sense of importance for those things. So yeah, I'd be selective about that.
And just remember, you have to change all of these settings every time you reuse that course. So you want to have a little bit of border collie in you, but not too much.
That raises the other question: how does the border collie check the box either?
Well, it's by giving timely feedback.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to shift gears to Bonnie. Would you want to see us look at the gradebook?
Yeah, let's do that next.
Okay.
And while Eric's getting set up there, just a reminder that now that we're going to be so virtual, a lot of the feedback that your students are used to getting and that you're used to giving is no longer available. In the face-to-face classroom, they get so much feedback from instructors, from either your voice, from your face, from your attitudes, from the things that happen. They get feedback because other students are asking questions and they're hearing them and they're hearing your answers. And so, it's until you get into the virtual classroom, it's hard to realize how limiting it can be. I used to call online teaching a little bit like teaching with both hands tied behind your back. And so the gradebook and that feedback that they get through these activities and through the gradebook are so important. And I know, you can make arguments that grades should not be so important to students, but let's think of it instead as this is the way they're going to get feedback now. It's not just going to be a number in the grade book, but these activities are all integrated, and the rubrics and the grading guides and all the things that we've been talking about are all ways for you to give them feedback and to give it to them quickly, because again, when they're in an online environment and they're just putting things out into the ether, they need to have something coming back from you. And they need it, in a timely way. You just can't wait weeks before you start, giving them that feedback. So we're really going to try to make the gradebook more understandable and accessible. And always we want you to know that the e-learning team is here to help you with your gradebook. We understand it's a complex, one of the most complex things in Moodle. And it's also very personal because you have your own sort of schedule of assignments and all of that. So we don't expect you to be here at this workshop and go away and you're going to know how to do your gradebook. We're here to help you with that. But Eric is going to go over the main ideas about it. I'll just say one more thing. Is I have to get time for a joke. I used to say that the Moodle gradebook was my job security. Now I've changed that to say the pandemic is my job security. So we understand it's complex. And so it's our job to help you with that.
Okay, so yes, so the gradebook is really going to be a best place for of course, our students to get that feedback, but also gives you a sense of checking in where are the students at from overall performance standpoint. So what I wanted to cover today is just a quick synopsis of the best practices for getting that gradebook structure in place, even when the curriculum or your modules that you're looking to do haven't been chosen quite yet. There's just a few steps to take to ensure that the gradebook is set up in your course to be as flexible as you need it to be, and still make sure that it's going to align with your syllabus design. So I'm going to walk through that process pretty quickly here, but again, feel free to chime in with any questions. I will say though, we found that a gradebook setup for a course is a very personal thing, and so I just highlight that our team is available for you to talk one-on-one and go through a spot check on your gradebook setup at any point. So please feel free to reach out for those types of questions. But anything in general, we'd be happy to try to address today. So I'm in my gradebook setup from my course. I've got a demo course here. And let's get, actually, that would be fine. So in many cases, our structure is, a group of assignments, a group of forums, some quizzes, and other assessment as we're moving throughout the course. And the important thing to set up for your gradebook is really just setting up categories to lump those items that are similar together. What a gradebook will have is a very top level course header here or folder, and this gives that max grade for your course, depending on what items are within it. So I'm going to set up a couple of categories here, and you're not going to spend hopefully a lot of time in the gradebook itself once the course gets going. A lot of your time will be spent in the course content, in those modules, and providing feedback through them. Everything that happens within those modules will flow to the gradebook automatically for you. It's actually really just getting that structure and framework in place, and then the rest of the work is done elsewhere. So I'll start it with add a category, and I'm going to create just a name for that. And I can set the grade. So I'm going to just use natural aggregation. This is the default setting, and that's what I would always recommend starting with. And I'll just save the changes for that. And you'll see that creates an assignment folder over here. I'm going to go ahead and just create another one called quizzes. And save changes. Here's another folder here. Let's do maybe one more called presentations. Apologies, I've got some lawn work happening next door. We'll try to minimize that sound. So then from here, I can create my assignments in my course ongoing and place them in here. I've got one test here. I'll go ahead and make this quick checkbox here. Oops. And say, move my test to my quizzes category. And you'll see one item will shift into this area here. Because it's worth 100 points, my quiz total, my quizzes category total now is going to be at 100. So it'll automatically add that stuff up for your points. The benefits of categories gives you a number of things. One is that you can weight them slightly differently based on how that should contribute to the overall grade. I might want to say my quizzes are worth 40% of my grade, and I can change that in my weights column here. My presentations are maybe worth 25. Assignments might be worth 25, and then the remaining might be what's ever left over. So I'm going to save that change. You'll notice that some numbers here are going to change as well because I've locked in a certain amount of weight for my course grade here in those categories. And so that is the flexibility of using the gradebook categories here. It doesn't matter how many assignments or how many quizzes, how many presentations I'm going to be actually using in my course. I can know that the assignments will always be 25% of the overall grade. And this is helpful when people need to pivot within a term. You know what, we're not getting this content. We need to do another assignment that really reiterates what we're trying to get at here. Or you're running out of time and need to pull back on one of these other components of your grade, of your curriculum, and that percentage will still hold true for the overall grade. One other thing that's really great about the assignments or a category is if I have, let me put another test in my quizzes category for a moment. I have a VoiceThread module. So I know I have 2 exams or 2 tests in my quizzes category. In my category settings, some people I know have used this where you can actually only keep the highest score of, if I have only 2 exams, I want to just let them, they'll get credit for the best performance they've done. If I have 4 exams, I could say keep the highest 3. Or however many you'd want to be doing. You can also do something called drop the lowest. So if I want to just remove the lowest score, I could set that as well. The benefit of keep the highest is you can the student's grade will actually show when they attempt their first quiz. That score will populate in the gradebook for them and show as an actual contribution. When they do the second one, the same thing goes forward. All right. Once they get to the third one and one beyond the keep the highest, then that starts to manage the score for that grade. If you do drop the lowest and they have only one, that's still their lowest score. It kind of actually is slow to actually provide reasonable feedback on how it's contributing to their overall grade. Bonnie, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, students will not be happy with drop the lowest because they're not going to be getting credit for the scores that they are accruing. And so you want to use keep the highest, because it's only when they get past that threshold that it'll start to drop whatever the grade is lowest. So to keep your students happy and to reduce the number of emails that you get, I recommend that you keep the highest.
Yeah. So here's an example of what that course or that grade category will show if you have one of those settings used. So look for this configuration in the description of that summary of the sum of points, and double check that you actually have the correct number for that highest value related to the number of items that you're planning to use in that category.
I just want, this is kind of an aside, but I know a lot of people do use this kind of method. If you haven't set it from the beginning and you start entering grades, you will not be able to make that change in the category. But there is a workaround, and we can go ahead and fix that.
I saw one question in the chat about, yes, you can set the quiz itself to keep the highest grade of a number of attempts on the same quiz. So yes, that can be managed within the quiz module before it is, given into the gradebook.
Yeah, there's another question there too. You're right, Debbie. She asked, does this work if quizzes have different numbers of points? They all of the numbers in that category will have to have the same max points in order for you to keep the highest or drop the lowest. So good question.
Yeah, thank you. That is the one limitation to keep in mind for using that feature. Yeah, everything needs to be the same number of points in that category. Outside of that category, you can use other values. I'm going to show one small setting here, which is, if I wanted to have something be an extra credit, I can actually do that once it's in the gradebook here. There's a setting. I'll do it for this assignment called vocal warm-up recording. If I want that to be an extra credit activity, there is a place to mark that as extra credit here. And then I can save changes. You will see in the grader report, the gradebook setup, a plus sign next to that point value. That is your visual indicator that this is marked as an extra credit assignment. And again, if there's questions about setting that up with your particular course, we are more than happy to walk through that and make sure that it's aligning with your expectations of how it should be calculating. Any other questions?
Yeah, we had a quick question. Maybe you could just show it. There was a question, let's say you have a quiz, syllabus quiz, and you don't really want to have it count towards the final grade. How can you give them a grade in the quiz, but not have it count?
That's a great question. Yes, so this weights, so you could still want to provide some assessment or feedback to your students like, hey, you scored 90 out of 100 for this quiz, but it's actually still not going to contribute to your overall grade. And the weights column is where you can do that. So the points don't matter after a while if you are really using the weights. The max grade is really that measure of relative performance for what you could do out of 100%. But let's make this test here as an example. If that was a syllabus quiz, it was really extra, not even extra credit, but no credit, I would put a 0 for that weight for that particular item and save that change.
But then we couldn't keep it in that category. Oh yeah, we could keep it in that category because the max points is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, if it's 0, I mean, really that item could live anywhere in the framework of the gradebook setup.
Yeah.
Yeah. There may be situations where an activity module isn't the right thing to use for a placeholder for a grade item. Even though we recommend using all of the full features of things like the assignment and the forum and quiz in Moodle, you might want to just create a regular grade item that doesn't really have any presence in the course. It's a very quick and easy way to add something for your grade book. And it looks slightly different. It's going to have a gray box and a pencil icon. And I'll just go ahead and save the changes here. So that's added here, sample grade item with a pencil and a box icon. And I can set the weighting to be a certain amount for the overall course. So if you're trying to create a placeholder for that one additional item that's there, and you're not looking to build out a lot of presence in the course content for that placeholder in a grade, you can do that. An example might be you've got a third-party publisher that is providing a lot of content for your students to engage in outside of Moodle, but you want to represent that in the overall grade in your Moodle course. You could create some items like this that would be the placeholder for those scores to come into Moodle and be present. It wouldn't have any other additional presence in the course content, but it is represented in the gradebook. And if you do have things like that in your course, we do offer help with getting some importing options available from those third-party sites. So please work with us on that. So those can be either synced or at least uploaded in a more efficient manner than you can certainly type it in manually, but there may be some quicker ways too.
So Eric, we just had a question about if someone had a syllabus quiz and they wanted to count it as part of their attendance and participation, they were using the attendance activity, which I see we've got up there.
Yeah.
Can you show them how to build that category for that could include another item?
Certainly.
And also how to weight within that category.
Great. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So we have an attendance and participation module, and then we have that, I'll just consider this test here as our syllabus quiz. So I want to create a new category called
Participation.
Participation. And I can even relocate these categories to, maybe I want this to be up at the top. So I'm going to click this up and down arrow and then place it right up here at the top. And then I'm going to want my attendance and participation activity inside of that participation folder. And I'm going to put this test also in my participation folder. I can either put it above the attendance module or below. And that's what these little indicators are here. It's where I want to drop it.
Now, notice that this is different from the drag and drop in the main page of the course. It's actually a click, wait for it to load, click where you want to put it. It's not a drag.
Yeah. And so now I have two items within my participation course category, grade category. And I can deselect that box. So maybe you might have that syllabus quiz maybe worth, just 10% of this grade category of participation, and my attendance and participation module would be the remaining 90%. So I could nudge those weights accordingly to whatever your preference might be. And that would give me an overall participation score within that folder, within participation category.
Okay, we have one more question too. This is it possible to have subcategories or nest folders within the larger categories?
You certainly could. Yes, you can continually nest folders in to itemize or do subgroupings within that.
Okay, here's a question. Are there linkages among courses that normally follow one another, such that the next course can have somewhat of a guide as to the level of knowledge of the incoming students? I would say no, but if you want to give a more involved answer. So you're thinking like a chemistry 1, chemistry 2 kind of thing, and you would have some knowledge of how they did in chemistry 1. No.
Yeah, I mean, not unless it was really built out to be programmatically set up that way. You could have maybe learning outcomes defined in some way and tie that to your activities in one course. And then, you know, faculty who are looking at that, who would be able to look at that previous course to validate what outcomes have been met would be way to go. But that's not really designed in the gradebook here as the way we're presenting it. That's a whole other workshop, I think.
So Eric, I know I'm looking at our list of things we're going to cover. If we also were going to talk about entering zeros.
Great. Yep, I can do that now. So I'd like to start with the assignment module. So when people are submitting work, there's a couple ways you can do that. In the assignment module, you could use the grading interface, which gives you a heads-up display with the submitted work by the student. I can make comments in the PDF here. I can provide feedback in my panel. There is a toggle switch at the bottom to show either the right panel or the left panel more exclusively as I'm working in that content. And so that's a per student view. There's another quick way if you're just really entering in some information. I could use view all submissions and it shows me my roster with a place to enter those grades here. Now, the important thing to know about the gradebook is Moodle will not count anything as part of the overall grade unless there's something entered in. If it's blank, it's not contributing to the overall course grade yet. Okay, so students don't have a 0 when they start. They actually are starting at 100% essentially until other values come into the gradebook. So what you need to be aware of is when you are progressing through your course, if a student has not submitted anything to this assignment, I want to make sure I'm putting in some value there to indicate I'm expecting this to be in by now, and this 0 will now impact the overall grade for that student. So I want to be putting in a 0 in those places.
For those of you who are hesitant to give zeros because you feel that it'll discourage the student, you know, there is a place to put feedback, and you can always put in that feedback section that this is a placeholder until I receive your paper and I can grade it. But you know, students have magical thinking about grades. So if I am 3 assignments behind where I need to be, but those 2 assignments I turned in, I got an 85. I'm going to be thinking I got an 85 in this course, even though I really have 3 zeros that have not been entered. So very important to put in, again, think about, you don't have that classroom contact where the student walks in and you say, you know, hey, I haven't gotten your paper yet. Are you going to turn that in? You've got to find ways to have that kind of contact. And a 0 doesn't have to be cold. It can be a placeholder. But you want to give them an accurate sense of their grade. You don't want them to suddenly, you know, get that shock like at week 14. You want them to be aware of where what their standing is all along.
And I'm just showing you here the user report, which is what the students would see when they are going to their gradebook for the course. They will see that feedback in addition to the score issued for that particular assignment. So they will have that information when they view it in those comments. The other place where you might be wanting to enter zeros is a little bit different, and that's with the quiz. The trick with the quiz is that there's nothing really to grade until the students have attempted the quiz. And so the interface to enter a 0 isn't really there in the assignment, like it is in the assignment module. So there is another place to do that. And that's something in the gradebook. If I go back, I'll just back up here So if you're in the gradebook setup from your course, click on View, and then Single View. And there's a nice way to enter zeros, especially for things like a quiz. So I'm going to choose my, I don't remember which test I have here. But in this case, the single view gives me a chance to choose my quiz. It shows a quick view of my roster. And what I want to do is do something called perform bulk insert. And I'm going to say for anything that's empty, I'm going to enter a 0. So this is with the assumption that the quiz attempts should have already been done and certain students have not. The quiz will automatically, or the quiz will provide a grade automatically if it's auto-graded. And then I can very quickly add a 0 for everyone else that has not submitted that attempt. It'll give me a confirmation those 2 items were set. So if you have a larger class, that can be a very handy thing. You can also just choose to override one at a time and set that to 0. The quiz works well for this. However, a very big important caveat here, if you are using the 0 override in the gradebook, any module information will no longer be shown or updated to the gradebook because it is considered an override. The design, again, is that modules have the information about their feedback and it gets pushed to the gradebook as a report. If the override is done here and the quiz is attempted again, you want to make sure to uncheck this box and then save that change. So once the quiz has been attempted, that value will go into the gradebook instead of a 0.
What counts as a module?
Assignment, quiz, forum, any activity that you're building in the course itself.
Yeah, we usually call them activities, but yeah, Moodle talk, it's a module because it begins with an M. We're up against the time here. In fact, we're a couple minutes over. So I'm going to shut off the recording. Eric and I will stick around.